1 week till Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony, our world premiere arrangement in miniature. So it seems like a good time to go even deeper into the life and times of this amazing man. But before I do, there's one thing I wanted to say, and that is we'd love to hear from you. So if you're watching this and there's a particular bit that you're really enjoying and you want to hear more about, we want to know. And in the reverse direction, if there's something that you're listening to that you'd rather we skipped out on and focused on other things, then let us know, because these videos are new for us, they're new for me, and we want to know how to make them sort of as perfect and as enlightening and interesting as possible. So anyway, on to Rach 2. So today's episode is called, in homage to Spectre, which is coming out this week, of course. It's called From Russia with Love. And the reason why I've called it that is because when you're talking about what inspired Rachmaninoff and what his music's about and what it might mean, you've got to start with Russia. So hopefully something that I got across in the first episode, or the main thing I hope I got across anyway, is that Rachmaninoff's approach to composing is that it should be an autobiographical act, that it should express something about what the composer has seen and done, or their emotional makeup, you know, their psyche. So the main thing I think that Rachmaninoff was trying to express about himself was his relationship with Russia. As he said himself, my music is a product of my temperament. So wherever I may live, it is Russian music. So yeah, for Rachmaninoff, music principally about his homeland, Russia. And I think there's a few things we need to know about what Rachmaninoff's Russia was. First of all, you know, most of the great pieces that Rachmaninoff wrote, he wrote in the 20th century, so it's easy for us to think of him as a 20th century composer, but he was born in the 19th century. So when we're thinking of the Russia that his music is trying to evoke, I definitely think we shouldn't be looking at, you know, the things that the country experienced in the 20th century, which reminds us of, you know, world wars, communist revolution, Cold War. It's definitely not that world. It's the far more grand, far more opulent, sort of romantic Russia of the 19th century. You know, we're talking about that sort of wealthy, aristocratic class, you know, their summer estates, the classic traditional architecture, the lavish parties, and then on the other end of the scale, you know, that traditional serf peasant class working the land, perhaps a sort of slight naive view of their life, which I'm sure was much tougher than that. But, you know, working the land out in the fresh air, and also that tight folk culture and camaraderie that they had. I think that's the Russia, that sort of idealistic version, anyway, of Russia, is the one that Rachmaninoff was trying to conjure up for us. And, you know, it's also important to know a little bit more about Rachmaninoff's, the nature of his relationship with Russia, because I'm sure we all feel close ties and a loyalty to the places that we're from. But actually for Rachmaninoff, it went way deeper than that. And this is, you know, this is like a personal relationship. It's almost like a relationship with another human being, because it's not a loyalty, it's actually a love of what being Russian meant. And also it's a love of that whole scale that we were just talking about, from the rich in their palaces to the people tilling the soil. It's a love of every building block of Russian life that Rachmaninoff had. And of course, nothing did he love more than the musical traditions of Russia. And he said that the reason why he became a composer was because when he was studying, he was at the St. Petersburg Conservatoire, which was just across the road from the famous Mariinsky Theatre, and he said it was that knowledge as he sat practicing the piano that, you know, just across the street were was the place where, you know, Tchaikovsky had premiered Swan Lake, where Mussorgsky had premiered Boris Godunov, and to know that he was within touching distance of this kind of holy center of Russian music, that was what inspired him to contribute his own work to that amazing lineage. So I think it's important to know that this is something very alive for Rachmaninoff, this connection to Russia. And also the last thing that you've got to understand is that this is not a relationship of pure love. You know, this is also a relationship of deep pain, and that is because Rachmaninoff had to live so much of his life in exile. You know, in 1917, he got on a train at the Finland station in Leningrad, and he fled. He fled the Bolshevik revolution all the way to Sweden and eventually to the United States. And after that train journey, he would never ever see Russia again. It was obviously in that moment an incredibly traumatic experience that he described as the destruction of all that we had known. It was war, it was revolution, and it was flight into the darkness. But it wasn't just that moment. That separation pained him throughout his life, because he was obviously separated from the land that he loved, and also because he had to watch from a distance rather, as that Russia that he knew, that he loved, that he was trying to keep alive in his music, it sort of changed inevitably and crumbled into this very, I guess, traumatic period of Russian history. And he had to watch it all from a distance, powerless, as the country was brought to its knees, first by the Communist Revolution and then by Second World War, Cold War. I suppose he died before the Cold War. He died in like 47, something like that. But definitely the Second World War, really kind of undermined everything that was the Russia that he knew. So that's a little bit about what Russia meant to Rachmaninoff. Next, I wanted to take a look at what that means for his music. So obviously music can mean whatever we want it to mean, and it can mean something completely different to you than it means to me. But what I've tried to do here is I've tried to pick a few of the features of Rachmaninoff's music that I think really reflect this relationship that he had with Russia. And the first place we have to start is the epic scale of each work. Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony is about an hour long, so it has this really expansive, sort of vast structure. And I get the feeling as though it's Rachmaninoff trying to encapsulate, everything that he felt and remembered and loved about this country, which, let's face it, is one of the world's largest countries. So you definitely get the sense of scale that you get when you look at, Russia on the map, or when you see images of these incredibly vast rolling landscapes that it has. You definitely get the same sense of scale from Rachmaninoff's symphonies. And secondly, the other thing that I think is really interesting is the mood. And it's always, I get this sense that it's always idealistic and definitely very, very nostalgic. You have these vast sweeping melodies almost all the time, and these lush harmonies underneath, and thick textures. And it's though for me each phrase is a little memory, recalling some far off place that Rachmaninoff is no longer in, or some more beautiful time than the one he's living through right now. And I suppose it's the way that we all, as soon as something wonderful happens, the way we all pull out our iPhones and try to capture it. It's as though he's taking musical pictures, grabbing hold of these memories before they vanish from their mind, as they have done from the life around him. And you know, I also think it's not just sort of memories of what did happen, it's also somehow images or imaginings of a life that could have been. You know, he was forced to leave Russia against his will, as we said, and he was forced as a man who was really deeply in love with a traditional way of life. He was forced to live through a century of such extraordinarily fast and drastic change. You know, I think that's where a lot of the poignancy and a lot of the heartache comes from in his music. And never was this more clear than in this little song that he wrote called The Dream. And before I play it to you, I just want to read you the translation of the Russian text. It goes like this. It says, "And I have a native land. Oh, how beautiful it is. There a fir tree swayed above me, but it was only a dream. Family and friends, they were living there. Words of love surrounded me, but it was only a dream." So this is The Dream by Rachmaninoff.
Со всех сторон звучали мне любви слова. Но то было сон.
So staying on that sort of sentimental element in his music, I think no understanding of it would be complete without looking at actually his musical nostalgia as well as this geographical one. Because, you know, as the century progressed, I think composing became Rachmaninoff's way of dealing with the, you know, incredibly bewildering and cold and complicated, at least to him, world of avant-garde art. He said, "I cannot cast out the old way of writing music because I cannot acquire the new. I've made an intense effort to feel the musical manner of today, but it will not come to me. This new kind of music seems to create not from the heart, but from the head. Its composers think, they do not feel. They have the capacity to make their works, no, they do not have the capacity to make their works exalt. They meditate, they protest, analyze, reason, calculate, and brood, but they do not exalt." And actually, Rachmaninoff was dogged by the criticism, even from people as iconic as Leo Tolstoy, that he was writing old-fashioned music, music that people did not need in this modern era. So he tried to embrace the culture that was developing around him, but it clashed so violently with his philosophy and with what he believed the purpose of art was, that I think in reality it simply made him cling more fiercely to these memories and this ideal world that he pictured inside. And so with that in mind, I wanted to play you his symphonic dances, which are interesting for two reasons for us, because first of all, he described them as a composition of what was and what might have been. And also because actually the piece quotes the Second Symphony that we will play. And for me, that little quotation, it's a memory, it's his way of looking back at a much happier and much more peaceful time in his life. So this is the symphonic dances of Rachmaninoff. So lastly, above and beyond this nostalgia, I think we have to go deeper and talk about the melancholy, the sort of underlying sadness that underpins basically everything Rachmaninoff wrote. And, you know, Rachmaninoff was constantly in mourning. He was mourning the destruction of the traditional Russia that he loved, and he was also mourning the loss of his home. Because as we said, he would never go back to Russia after he left in 1917, and he would never really find anywhere that replaced it. This is how he described it in his memoirs. He said that for all of his life he felt like a ghost wandering forever in the world, and that all he had to connect him with his home was his music and his memories. So he'd go through life, I think, forever feeling homeless, irrespective of where he settled. And particularly when he moved to America, that was the first place he really put down roots after fleeing Russia. He would always feel out of place, and always, to find calm and to find quiet, need to look backwards to where he'd come from. You know, it's no surprise though, because he arrived with no money, he arrived with not one word of English, and he found himself in this world of sort of noise and crowds and hustle and bustle. I think we can't imagine what the culture shock must have been like for him. And above and beyond that, you know, he didn't have time to settle in to find his feet. He had to just dive straight into working himself to the ground, because he owed so many people money, so many people had had to help him financially with his escape from Russia. And he also had this family that were completely dependent on him to sort of put a roof over their head and to feed them. And you know, it's not like he was a stranger for long. He was embraced by the musical community of America almost instantly. But even with that, even being lauded as a genius, a musical genius, really the only peace he could ever find was in this summer home that he rented in New Jersey. And that was because there he insisted on hiring Russian staff. You know, he only had Russian friends round to visit, and the language that was spoken was Russian. And even there, even in what seems like a little oasis of home in this crazy new country that he found himself in, he said this, he said, "Nothing could give us back what we most desired, our homeland." And then he went on to talk about the struggles he was having in America to compose. He said, "For the exile whose musical roots have been annihilated, there remains no desire for self-expression." You know, when he left Russia, he really never again found an easy way to compose. In the end, the best solution he found was that he had to actually build from scratch a kind of quasi-Russian summer house on the banks of Lake Lucerne. And that was the first time, years and years after he left, that he kind of found any confidence and inspiration to compose. And what he wrote when he was there was this iconic rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, both as a sort of celebration of the fact that he'd managed to find or create somewhere where he could rest and be comfortable, and also to actually pay for the bills, because as you can imagine, that was probably a really expensive undertaking. So this is a little highlight from Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. So, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed I've just had a very rapid costume change, and actually that's because when I came to upload this part of the video, it had no sound, which I didn't think was that useful. So here I am recording it again, and the good thing about that is I've had a brainwave in between first go and this go, and that is to share with you this book, which is at a slight tangent. Here we are. Oh, there we go. Chagall, Love and Exile by Jackie Warschlager. And the reason why I thought of this book is it's, number one, brilliant, one of the best sort of biographies I've ever read, and number two, it is just entirely based on all the same themes that we've been talking about. So if you're interested in this period in history and what it meant to be a Russian artist at that time, this is a fantastic book because it deals with all the same issues. You know, Chagall also loved Russia. He was incredibly connected with his home, and yet he also had to flee the communist regime and make a new life for himself in the West. And he definitely experienced all the same problems as Rachmaninoff, you know, the longing to go home, the knowledge he never could, this feeling that he was sort of somehow separated from the culture he was forced to live in, that, you know, he was, as Rachmaninoff said, a ghost walking through this strange world. So definitely it's a book worth checking out. And yeah, if you have any suggestions, I'm sorry I don't have a book about Rachmaninoff for you, but I couldn't find one. I think all my information has just come from looking inside scores and on the internet. So if you have a great book about Rachmaninoff, do share it with us. Drop us a little line in the comments, or send us an email, send us a tweet, whatever. But I just want to finish up with showing you where the Second Symphony fits in with all of these themes and all of these sort of stages in Rachmaninoff's life. Well, it was finished in 1907, so we are sort of on the way to the First World War. But what's crucial is Rachmaninoff is obviously still in Russia, so he's not an exile yet. However, I think he was beginning to understand that the country that he was in, the world that he loved, was most definitely in its twilight years, and that sort of change was both imminent and inevitable. And I also think in the sort of general society, he, like most other people, would have definitely started to sense the fear, the unease, and the kind of tension that would lead first to a world war, and then to the Bolshevik Revolution that would, of course, force him to leave. However, you know, it's not that time yet, and actually, in a personal sense, this is a moment of bliss and also triumph for Rachmaninoff. 3-4 years before this point, his first symphony had been premiered and was a complete disaster, and he'd gone into this sort of period of exile, compositional exile, for 3 years, where he didn't write a thing, and in fact he ended up having to take hypnotherapy classes just to sort of help him deal with the trauma of writing a piece that was so badly received. So anyway, 3 years of hypnotherapy later, he would write his second piano concerto, which then, like it is today, was a smash hit. And he followed that up soon after with the Second Symphony. So, you know, this is coming at the peak of this wave of real success as a musician. And it's also coming in the moment when he finally married his long-term fiancée. So both on the personal level, on a career level, you know, this is a wonderful time for Rachmaninoff, and I definitely think that sings through in the music. So I think what makes it a fascinating piece of music is it sits at an inflection point, doesn't it, between probably one of the high points in Rachmaninoff's life and really imminent disaster. So we have this musically, we have this mix between the young, the naive, and the sort of hopeful Rachmaninoff, and also the man that we get to know as the 20th century progresses, the sort of older, more wistful, more backwards looking Rachmaninoff. So yeah, I hope this has been of interest. I'll be coming back in a couple of days with another little video exploring a couple of other key themes I think that you find in the music of Rachmaninoff. So till then, have a great weekend and I'll see you next week.